had to wait for our names to come up so we knew where to sit.
Exactly. Welcome, everybody. How great to see you all. We'll be having a lovely, cozy discussion about AI at scale. No biggie, right? We're talking to two of the men in the industry who are driving this really at scale. So very happy to have you here at AI House. We're having a moderated discussion for half an hour, and you can already think about your own agenda. I'm Nicole. Nicole Büttner, one of the partners at Merantix Capital, our pre-seed seed fund, and I also run our tech-enabled service company, Merantix Momentum, where we work with government agencies and corporates to implement AI use cases. I have two fabulous men who probably don't need a lot of introduction, but I'm still going to bother you because their biographies are very impressive. So, Richard, you have had a relationship with Merantix for a number of years now, so thank you for accompanying us. You're the founder and CEO of you.com, founder and managing partner of AIX Ventures, so you also invest. You previously served as a chief scientist and EVP at Salesforce, and before that, you were a CEO and CTO of an AI startup, MetaMind, and which was acquired by Salesforce, right, in 2016. You received your PhD in computer science at Stanford, and you're widely known, inventing the most widely known used word vectors, contextual vectors, and prompt engineering. So you've been kind of really at the heart of in the eye of the hurricane of this. So thank you very much for joining us. Jim Stratton is the Chief Technology Officer at Workday, responsible for the strategic direction of the company's technology and for driving architectural consistency across the products and technology organizations. You've joined Workday in 2013. And you've served in various leadership roles since, most recently as Chief Technology Architect. And in this role, you oversee various cross-platform initiatives and provide technical oversight of key acquisition opportunities. You held a position at Johns Hopkins University of Applied Physics, at the Applied Physics Laboratory, and you hold a Master of Business Administration from the University of Maryland, and a Mastery in Mechanical Engineering from Johns Hopkins. And I found that very fascinating when we had our intro call. This is basically only the second job you had.
It's only the second job I've had.
And before that, and Jim has been focusing on. Before that, you're doing spacecraft.
Building spacecraft, yeah.
And now you're solving AI at scale. So I think you're working on pretty big things. I was wondering, Jim, what's your view? We've been in Davos now 2-3 days. What's your view on on recent development? What's happened for you in the last 12 months that you think you're excited about, you're worried about, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I was here a year ago. It was my first time in Davos. And last year, it was still a lot of theory, at least in enterprise. So Workday builds and deploys and serves HR and finance software for medium and large enterprise companies. A lot of the conversation last year was, how do we get started? We know we need to invest in AI. We know that it can potentially bring us value creation, ROI, but people didn't know how to get started. We've spent this last year really getting started and really deploying and delivering AI at large scale in enterprise software now. And this year, the conversation, as much as anything, is about how do we get users and companies comfortable with adopting it, and this is just a new version of human-machine teaming, of us leveraging technology to improve efficiency, to get more work done, to get more output out of what we do. But there's this cultural shift that needs to happen where people get comfortable interacting with the AI. And that's kind of where it feels like we are right now, is that internal cultural shift about how do we accept that we're moving into this world of real human-machine teaming, and get comfortable with that and be happy and excited and motivated about it. So that's a lot of the conversation that I'm hearing this week.
So do you expect us to basically, although it's the year of AI adoption, a lot of the conversation being about humans and culture and mindset and change management?
Very much so. I think it's really put a focus on, and actually we just published some research that we did about sort of the human impact on the advent of agents and large-scale AI coming into the workforce. And it really is showing that we need to focus more on those uniquely human skills of how do you interact with other humans, how do you have empathy, creativity, problem solving together, things like that. Those skills that we sort of take for granted in terms of how we all build success in our careers and develop experiences and all of that. They're very human-centric things. Those are probably more important than ever, actually, as we begin to leverage. If you start thinking about agents and agents taking on workload within the enterprise work that gets done, those human to human interactions are actually probably more important than ever. And I do think we've kind of taken them for granted. We don't write those out on our resumes and CVs and all of that, but I think we should actually, because it's increasingly important now as we really get into this world of human machine teaming.
And Richard, you kind of invented prompt engineering. So when we look at a lot of the metadata of the usage of foundation models, we realize people are not really using it quite as a conversation partner yet at scale, but are rather sticking to habits of search patterns. Did you anticipate this when you thought about how to interact with machines, and how are you dealing with this topic as you're building your own product and interfaces for enterprise?
That has certainly been my dream. I started studying linguistic computer science, is what it was called, in 2003 in Germany. And at the time, that was my hope and dream. And then 2010 started bringing neural networks into that field, and that's when we started seeing more and more progress. And I do think it's been quite an interesting transition. When I started U.com in 2020, we'd been waiting for Google to pick up our prompt engineering paper for 2 years. We had published that in 2018. No one really changed how people find information in search, and so we thought, well, someone's got to do it, so may as well be us. And so we started U.com to try to bring prompt engineering ideas of large language models and just getting answers rather than lists of blue links for consumers. But what we really realized is that a lot of consumer search queries are quite simple. Right? You ask a fairly simple question: what's the score of the game? What's the weather tomorrow? But it turns out knowledge workers are those that have really useful questions that are requiring more intelligence than what you'd get from a default search engine. And so when last year we transitioned into more and more of a focus on enterprise customers and knowledge workers, companies, that's when we started, essentially 40x our revenue last year, and seeing a huge transition in how people do knowledge work. And we've done some workshops with companies, and once we explain it to them, even those companies that already paid 200 seat licenses or something for the product will then buy 500 more because they realize, oh wow, this can be used in engineering, in sales, in service, in marketing, in HR, in recruiting, and the list goes on, ops. And that's been a really exciting shift to see, that more and more roles kind of understand the power of this technology, not just for getting a simple answer, but really explaining, becoming a manager of AI, if you will, and explaining AI what the workflow is, and then just having it do it for them.
Okay, and so what are the concrete nudges? Because I imagine, so we've done, for example, projects with law firms, and we found legal professionals are quite tricky, because if you just show them one part of the process and say, can you just quickly check if that's all right? Usually the standard answer will be, oh, can you show us, I need the whole document. I can't just answer this based on one little short context window. I don't know if you see these patterns also in other fields, but we've seen this just behaviorally. It's very hard for them to shift this behavior, and then all the time efficiencies basically get lost because they fall into old behavioral patterns, and they'll pull up the old document and then kind of start working in their old workflow, and then obviously all these speed gains are lost. Are there some very practical tricks? I'm sure there are a lot of you who are building LLM systems in some way, shape, or form in your companies. Like, what has really worked, like from a UX perspective, or from what are you telling people in these workshops? How can they really change?
So it's complicated, and it depends on the company, right? So the best ones and some of our biggest deployments are actually where we take the API that offers those answers. And by the way, U.com, we provide like answers, agents, and path towards AGI for companies. And what that means is often you need to have a search stack. So you search over company internal data as well as external data, the web, right? Imagine you're working in a company, like you think, oh, what are our 3 biggest customers in Southeast Asia, and what are other customers like them? If you have that kind of question, U.com will answer it for you. And so depending on what your workflow is, it might actually be better to, instead of having to use a new tool like U.com proper, you actually infuse the answers through an API into your existing workflow. And so that's helped, for instance, with the DPA, the German press agency, which like over 95% of all publishers in Germany are on that platform. They actually had a really strong engineering team already, had their own interfaces. And so instead of forcing them into a completely different tool, we just infuse the right answers with the right citations and over their entire corpus of news articles that they've written since 1948 into their existing workflow. And that was necessary for that deployment to work. In other cases, like we have venture capitalists and some of their customers and their needs are uploading a data room and then asking a bunch of different questions. You will know this use case. Right now, as a VC, you will basically say, well, if I get a data room, I have these 10 things I'm checking for as a first pass. Well, now you can just upload that whole data room into you.com, and then you explain to your agent what you would do, and then it will go through all the different spreadsheets and try to identify the facts that you're looking for as your first pass. And so there wasn't really a useful tool and a workflow for a VC to have done that before, and so they're okay switching to this completely new workflow, because before it was kind of a messy, I'm going to try this file, I'm going to go through this folder, maybe it's a Dropbox thing, and now they just drag and drop it and it's a new process. So it highly depends.
So how do you deal with this, Jim?
Well, I actually, in a similar way, so you're saying it's a new process, but it's not really. It's formalizing the process they were going through before that was very manual and going back and forth. And we think about it in similar ways, in that we look at business processes that are happening within the enterprise. So recruiting is really kind of an easy example where you're writing out a job description and the set of skills that you need to fill that particular role. And then a talent acquisition professional is going out and sourcing the available candidates, be it internal or external, that they have visibility into, screening those, trying to find the best match for it, going through the scheduling, human-to-human interaction part of it as well, but then actually getting into scheduling of interviews and whatever other criteria you have for bringing people on board, to actually getting them into the hire process and onboard and all that. That's a terrific place for automation of parts of that workflow, and that's what we're already doing today. We have a recruiter agent out there that automates a lot of that sourcing and matching and recommendation of, these are probably your top 10 candidates, and it takes a lot of the manual effort, a significant, like 50% of the manual effort, out of the recruiter's hands. They're still doing the same workflow. The part that they really like doing is finding those best candidates and having conversations with them and understanding, like, is this the right place for you? Are you the right person for this role? So it's automating part of it, but it's really an assistant within an existing workflow that they have today. And over time, those agents are going to develop more skills to the point that really they probably become full-fledged members of teams. And then you can really start thinking about, how do you set up your team with both your people, human, organic workforce, and your digital workforce as well. So that's how we're thinking about it. That's how we're building it. And that resonates a lot with our customers that we interact with too.
Yeah, very interesting. I have a different question, because a lot of the enterprises, right, are facing these questions around buy or build. So the tech stack is at the moment quite complex, right? You have some foundation model, you have some open source things, you can use integrations in other parts of your office suites, you can procure products like yours. Can you maybe shed a little bit of light on where you see yourself in this, let's say, a bit messy world, right? That's still a bit fluid, and where you see your solution specifically with a long-term USP with regards to the spaghetti bowl of manners in which you could automate your HR workflow.
Yeah, and a lot of the conversation, I talk with CIOs more than anyone in our customer and prospect base. And as I said, a year ago, all of them had some form of mandate from their CEO or their board to leverage AI, make an investment in it. And a lot of them have gone to try to build custom homegrown solutions for some use case. And a lot of it ends up like people start in call centers and customer support and things like that, or even help desk, ticket case deflection, those types of use cases. It costs a lot of money to build it, and it's hard to do it terribly well unless that's what you do really as a full-time job, and you have access to a very large set of contextual data for whatever particular type of problem you're solving. So I think where that's really going is, for the most part, it's worth leveraging third-party providers that specialize in a particular space. For us, that's HR and finance and all the applications that go around that. We have data that we host at a very, very large scale that allows us to build out domain-specific solutions. That's very difficult for other companies to build out that same. It's hard for a specific company to build out those types of solutions when they don't have the access to that very large data set. So I think leveraging that for the things that, frankly, aren't really differentiating for a particular business. Most businesses aren't trying to win at HR. They're trying to do HR and to enable them to do whatever it is that allow them to differentiate and succeed in their own space. So I think really, for me, the focus for build would be on those things that really differentiate you. Really focus on those, and in particular, where you have the actual data to build something that is truly differentiated against your competition.
Yeah, maybe to double down on this. Like, I think as every company needs to understand sort of their core expertise and what differentiates them, where are they comparing themselves exactly to the competition. So, if, for example, if you're an insurance company, you probably don't want to outsource risk understanding and risk classification to an external provider. That is your core expertise, and you should build an AI team around that. If on the other hand, there's various sales, service, marketing, knowledge work, different kinds of workflows. We've actually seen some of our biggest customers had failed GPT homegrown solutions first, realized, okay, it's like 70% accurate. It demos quite well, right? I can give an amazing demo and see, oh, my team built this ourselves. We're an AI expert too now, all right? Because you took an OpenAI API and you built it. Now you're also stuck with one vendor. And so a lot of companies just finally got out of single cloud lock-in and are multi-cloud. And now they're like single LM lock-in, and it's also not ideal. So, and then they realize, okay, now we have a new LM. Now we need to embed our entire vector database anew. And that costs us more than if we had just used an external provider for that whole project. And so maybe it starts to make sense. So I think as companies are going from POCs and fun demos to, okay, we want to make this really accurate so we can trust it like 95, 99% of the time. The citations need to really work. I need to know where the facts come from. I can't just maybe it's hallucinated, maybe it's real, and I want to rely on it. My job, I will reflect really poorly on me if I say the wrong facts in my meetings that I got from this AI. Then they start realizing, okay, where does it make sense to build versus partner?
Okay, and what's your view? I mean, kind of the RAG systems, the enterprise search, I guess that's a use case that's super useful, right? I mean, obviously a lot of companies are doing it. Where do you see, where does your creativity go when you think about, other use cases? Because I think this is something we've seen throughout the last year or two, that more and more enterprises are adopting, and I think that's a great start, in my opinion. But exactly the use cases that you were talking about, deeper into the value chain, to the core of the business model. I mean, what's your view on this? Maybe also from a technical side, right? How are companies constrained by this, or where can they double down? How can they really lean into this? I'm just thinking about what you said earlier. They cannot build a great solution. We know it's because they have a limited amount of data, and you serve many enterprises, so you can aggregate. So how do you see this panning out in the end, right? Because you're from Germany, a lot of SMEs there. What are the structural restrictions, but maybe also advantages you see?
So one big shift actually in the world of AI comes from foundational models and the fact that you don't need as much data anymore to do something, right? A foundational model has read most of the things on the internet, so it has a good sense of the meaning of a lot of different explanations and different workflows. And so we actually don't need as much data anymore. And a lot of times a company like Workday or other large CRM companies, they can't actually use all the data from all the customers to train a model, right? Like, turns out if you want to do sales prediction and you have Pepsi and Coca-Cola as a customer, they don't want you to train a single sales prediction model, right? So they actually have to do tenant-specific stuff anyway. So sometimes the very large companies, they can't actually use all their data to train a single powerful model. It has to be very specific to each customer. And then that has actually been quite a big change in the world of AI. And then I think in terms of concrete use cases, what's interesting is a question of whether we can just kind of push AI into all the existing software, or if there is new kind of software for some of these workflows that will emerge. So concretely, for instance, in programming, we're seeing now of Codium and Cursor companies that really rethought how we program in a completely new interface, and they're doing very, very well and growing very rapidly. We're seeing similar things, like one fun use case was a marketer told us, oh my God, this basically automates 50% of every other week for me, because what I used to get is a PDF from the product engineering team, and then I had to go and understand what the new features were that they wanted us to now market. What I would then do is I go on the web, I understand if our competitors have those features also. Are they novel? How different are they? How differentiated are they? And then I would write like 2 email marketing campaigns for this industry and that industry, and 3 LinkedIn messages and 2 tweets. And basically what they realized after a workshop was that they can just explain exactly what those steps are to an agent, and then they just drag and drop a PDF into it, and then it just goes through all those steps. And then what used to take them like half a week, every month there was a new release, now it just takes 10 minutes. They maybe check it for another 10 minutes, and they're done. And so there wasn't really, again, the process existed, but not in a way that's structured like that, where they had to think about really, how do I explain this now? And this is a really interesting, I think, change. We will all become managers of AIs. Right? That is an interesting and weird thing to really internalize what that means, right? Most people are individual contributors. They get tasks, they do those tasks. If you now have to learn how to manage, it's also a bit of a new kind of skill for a lot of folks. And generally what that means is we will see just more and more intelligence in our lives. Like things that used to be impossible to afford for people will be much, much more accessible. So concretely, for instance, when technology goes really deeply into field, zooming out a lot, then eventually a billionaire and a middle-class teenager will use the same phone, right? And so now we can think about, well, what currently can only the CEO get in their personal lives or in their work lives? And well, if you're really, really wealthy, you can have a personal tutor for your kids. You can have a personal healthcare team that understands exactly all the problems that your body has, looked at your MRI scans, looked at your genes and everything, and then giving you very personalized medical treatments and recommendations. You can have a personal assistant, right, that will do all the boring tasks for you. Well, those 3 are just examples that with AI, we will all be able to have access to. And it will proliferate, and we'll have more intelligence that we can rely on in our lives, both at work and at home.
Since we're now broaching on the topic of agentic AI and agents, and you're basically building an agentic workforce for companies, where not only some people will manage agents, but maybe the agents will also manage parts of you. I don't know. Like, what do you? How do you deal with this, and what's your vision of how this will evolve in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think at the moment anyway, we don't really think about it in terms of the agents managing us, but more assisting, augmenting us in our roles and what we do, and our teams too. And maybe coming back to something you were saying, Ricard, but I like the idea of the equity and the ability to have just kind of a common base of access to the technology and what it can do for us. The other way we think about it is really driving growth. So just to use one example, so we leverage copilots internally, both candidly we use GitHub Copilot for kind of our standard development, and the Workday application is written in a proprietary language, so we built a copilot for that to help us with that. And all of that demonstrates maybe 20-25% productivity gains for our software developers, which are the largest population of, we're a software shop. So that's many of our employees. And we do get questions of, well, that's great, particularly from Wall Street and investors, like, so does that mean you can work with 20% fewer developers within the team? And the answer to that could be yes, depending on how you want to run your business, but we can do 20% more stuff on top of it. We can move much faster, and we can develop, we're more productive, we can put more out. and presumably grow the business faster. And that's just one small example. You think about that across all industries and the way that we could actually really drive revenue and really GDP growth across the globe. I think that's super exciting, and I do think that's not only the possibility. I think that's an inevitability out of where we are right now.
You touched two interesting topics. One around KPIs, because you're basically going from the return on invest to a speed metric there, right? And like, what are you actually looking at and what are you optimizing for as an organization? So I'd love to hear your take on that. And then the second one is on equity, and that touches an equally interesting topic that we kind of started out with, the human component and literacy. If everybody has the same starting opportunities, because it's basically a mobile phone, how important does training become, and literacy, and kind of playing with the tools and playing with them fast and experimenting, upskilling? Because we've seen these first studies, right, where there are cohorts of students and they're prompting GPT, and there's one cohort they're basically prompting for answers, and obviously their score like improves by, I don't know, some 30-40%, and there are those who have like a guardrail system, so the system won't actually give you answers but will make you critically reflect on your path to the answer, and then you take away basically the LLM from the humans. And then first group decreases quite massively in performance, and the second is still better than the baseline. So I think that's quite interesting on human capability. Maybe because I think that's for all organization really critical points about literacy, and maybe because you've already broached this a little bit, like what do you do personally to keep up to date? Because I mean things are changing quickly, and what are the KPIs you mainly present or talk about internally and with your customers?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. So we've already talked about it. We think in terms of kind of business flows for in particular for what we build and deploy out to our customers, and how we talk about ROI with them. It's exactly like that recruiting example that I use. That's recruiting is one of the most expensive costs within HR. Well, if you can shrink that by 25% and 25 to 50%, and you can increase time or shorten the duration of from sourcing to that person actually being in their seat, that's real money back into a customer's bottom line. So that's how we talk about it with customers, and that's how we think about what we build and deploy. Internally, what we're doing is looking at time savings, basically. And we use that as our metric. So where we're building out business cases of, do we want to continue to leverage this particular copilot that we're doing, or do we want to use Zoom AI for summarizing meetings? Like, how much time are we actually saving off those? Because we know how much they cost, we know how much we're paying for them, but how much are we actually getting back for it? And now, today, we have very real business discussions about, is this investment worth it? Sometimes the answer is no, sometimes the answer is yes, but there are ones where it very clearly is yes. But it comes back to that ROI discussion of, is it worth the price tag? Because we do know how much it costs now, but are we getting the productivity gains that we want out of it? And for us, at the moment, in particular, it's around speed. We're still trying to move very fast as a company, despite being fairly big at this point. And so it's about time to market, time to value for our customers in particular.
Okay. Which usually also improves other business metrics like revenue and so on, right?
Sure,
So, yeah.
of course.
Okay.
Yeah, we like to propose to our customers to double their revenue, not the headcount. It is an interesting question how to think about the impact of jobs on AI in general, and it's very, very complicated, because even within one kind of software suite of like giving answers, the impact might be very different. So concretely, you can look at sales and service. If you double the productivity of your salespeople, you'll just be happy to make twice the sales. If you double the productivity of service people, you might just say, well, I have only so many answers be given for my service department, and I need half the people. Right? And so I think you have to look at the KPIs very concretely in which role you're working on. And in several cases, I think it will disrupt certain kinds of jobs. And in other cases, you're just happy to be more productive.
So before I open up for the audience, maybe one more question back to the tech stack and how you're thinking about building it and your interaction with various LLMs and models, and how you're making sure you're staying ahead of the curve and managing all these complex interactions of agents that you're building. Can you share a little bit, give us a little look under the hood? Because I'm sure a lot of people, once they dive into this and maybe try to build something themselves, they realize, oh, I didn't realize there was so much under the hood, right? Because it's quite complex interactions of various systems. So
Yeah, so I guess high level, without going into too much technical detail, when you ask a question to one of these systems, there's sort of two stacks. There's a search stack and then the LLM answering stack. And in the search stack, you first need to actually send the right query to your search engine. And if you, for instance, are in the middle of a conversation and then you just say, when were they founded? Well, if you just say, when were they founded, you send that to your search engine, it's not going to send you any useful results back because it doesn't know who they refer to anymore. So you actually have to do, and this is one of the many sort of examples that companies realize, like, oh, this is getting more complicated than we thought as we want to have these interactions and have our homegrown solutions. There's an entire module on just query rewriting, right? You send an entire PDF into it and be like, explain the comparison to their, give me a comparison to their competitors. And now it's like, okay, well, here's a, many 1,000-page or 1,000-word PDF, and I need to understand the competitors. And I need to go on the web and find out who they are. So I need to actually parse that entire PDF and understand which company is being talked about, and then go and make that query in a way that the internet will send me some useful results back. So that is just one of like several dozens of modules that goes into this. Then you can often decide actually which LLM to use to get you the best answer, because LLMs change and some are better at some things than others. Then you might have to say, well, if it wants me to do a bunch of math, then maybe I need to, instead of hallucinate that with an LLM, actually enable the LLM to use a tool such as programming, let an LLM program, and then run that code, which is also a huge security nightmare, because then people will immediately say, hack this computer and give me all the password files. People have tried it on you.com, or mine me some bitcoins, and then your computer is gone for a long time, right, if it allows you to program anything. So you need to then run that code with the right permission sets and the right access to files and so on, and then incorporate that answer back into it. So I don't want to go for too long, but those are just 2 or 3 of the modules that are technically under the hood to do it as well.
yeah. So how often do you change out modules, Jim? In your
Frequently.
how many roughly can you?
So maybe I'll talk a little bit about the kind of the approach that we take, and then how often we're swapping out models. But you bring up a good point about the security of this as we move into role-based agents and they take on more skills and capabilities. We have to treat them just like the other pieces of your workforce, including all the security and audit and access control around all of that. It's a great point. The way we leverage LLMs today is we're taking a 2-pronged approach, and will for a while probably. Most of what we do and what we put out into production today, we leverage third-party open source LLMs, and then we take some of the data that we host and build domain-specific models on top of those. And we do that for a couple reasons. One is to constrain the set of knowledge that model has, so things like hallucinations and unsafe answers are less likely to come out of those. We very much constrain the prompt engineering into them as well. But then we actually build tenant-specific adapters, kind of the point you were making earlier. We don't want to mix Coke and Pepsi's models, but you can do a whole lot building a domain-specific base model underneath that, and then having very lightweight adapters that are specific per tenant. So that's the approach that we take in general. That said, we're also very much in touch with the frontier model providers and doing proofs of concept and watching those change. Maybe I'll go back to your question. It's very quick for us to swap out those base models and retrain on top of it. And we're, to your point, the capabilities for different types of functions that come out in those changes very rapidly, and some are better at some things than others. So we're constantly evaluating that, but it's really quick for us to swap those out on the back end. And we're keeping up with the latest of what the frontier providers are doing to see how much more we could leverage out of that, working with them directly. The whole enterprise tenancy and frontier models, those two haven't really come together yet, but I think that's something that we'll see over the next probably year or so.
It's pretty incredible what that means, right? Like the marginal cost of intelligence is going down, and we'll see this Jevons paradox from the previous industrial revolution play out again, which doesn't mean that we'll need less of it. We'll just use it in more and more places. And every time a new really frontier open source model comes out, you can almost hear the evaporation of billions of dollars of the closed source models and like foundational model providers, which is why they're arguing a lot of times against open source. But it's clear that it's been an incredible accelerator for the world and distributed those kinds of skills and models much more broadly.
Great. So, over to you. Over to you. Here in the back.
Richard, great. Richard, I really enjoyed your example of the marketers and sales. I'm from North America, and 2 to 1 people fear AI because they fear job loss. So in your training, is psychological safety one of the most important messages? In other words, if you're in marketing, we're going to repurpose you into a salesperson and give you a career path. I was at a BCG breakfast a day or 2 ago. It's kind of a blur. And people...
This morning, I saw you.
People who'd gone through extensive training, their fear of AI fell from 40% to 10%. That's a 4x difference, and in my opinion, that greases the skids on AI digital transformation. Can you share your insights about the impact your training has had on people who go through it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think we've seen some interesting stories actually. Sometimes people just log into the consumer site and use their company email with it, and so we reach out to them and say, hey, maybe your whole company wants to use this tool, and they're like, I don't want anyone to know that I use this tool, because they actually don't feel safe within their organization, right? And there are also some folks who say, well, I can just work half the time when I'm remote. So it's like, okay, it's another setup, right? And like get the same work done, but in half the time, and no one knows about the AI and the rest of the company, right? So it's a pretty complex situation. I think ultimately there has to be a mix of top down and bottoms up in terms of communicating that. I think it's been very helpful when CEOs say, hey, we all want to push harder and be more productive. We will work with you, and when we find efficiencies, we will all find a way together to repurpose this role into just a new kind of productivity role and to educate their folks. And I think it actually behooves the CEOs that have, for instance, very large service teams to really think about this. And actually, 3-4 years ago at Davos, I already gave that advice to CEOs. If you have a lot of folks in service, think now about what kind of upskilling they need to help people. Instead of just giving you a quick answer, which the AI will do more and more of, I will follow up. Oh, it looks like you had a great experience and immediately got your problem resolved. You want to have some time to think about some other features, and it looks like you might be benefiting from these new capabilities and so on, and help service people become sort of pre-sales and sales folks in the process. And so I think that has to be a CEO level task to make people feel safe about this and know that as they're getting more productive, they'll be helped in that transition and not hurt.
Hasna?
Hi, I'm Hassan from Merantix Momentum. I have a question for Jim, actually. So speaking about ROIs, and when you're talking about promising time saving, ergo also saving money, but the final user of also your platform, Workday, it would be all of these people that have sometimes to fill in timesheets, and you need to ensure adoption to ensure time saving, ergo money saving. How do you ensure adoption in such cases?
That's a great question. Part of it comes back to cultural change management that you were just talking about, really, and we talked about early on too. We have a whole services organization that their whole job really is about helping customers take up features and adopt them. So that's one part of it and actually a lot of the BCGs of the world and others, that's what their role is primarily, is helping companies go through these types of changes. But we also build a lot into the product too to make it easier to take up and to use and to see the value that individual users are getting. And I think increasingly that user experience side of things is an incredibly important thing as we're taking on these agents and role-based agents that are helping us do work, whatever that might be in the workflow. The overall user experience, so we get over the psychological safety. It's okay for the machines to be helping me out. Like that UX piece of it is hugely important. So building that directly into the product as well, along with transparency around here's why I made the prediction, here's where I got the answer, here's the section of the document you asked a question of, here's where I pulled that from. Building that directly into the product so that people get used to this notion of interacting with the machines and they trust what it's doing. I think that's incredibly important.
There's a question here.
Hello, my name is Daniel Stauffacher. I'm the founder of ICT for Peace Foundation. And since 20 years, we have been looking at how technology can help peace building, humanitarian operations. And I think we came a long way already with the technology that is available, including mapping and so forth, and search engines and crowdsourcing. And now my question to you is how, and you said, I mean, we could handle all these agents. And if I'm a humanitarian worker, I would like to use also such a agent. Have you seen examples of that already? And would you be willing to help maybe test and these kind of usage of by people in the field who help protect human rights or immediate emergencies and so forth?
Be happy to work together, yeah, and find synergies. I actually had this interesting paper in 2019, I think, where we built an AI economist. I think actually a lot of conflicts ultimately boil down to inequalities financially, economic inequalities, and so you can actually have an AI suggest policies also by playing out a conflict or an economic environment for billions and billions of years and trying many, many different ways of increasing productivity in an economy, but also equality, and then play out potential scenarios and then see what kinds of policies or taxation and subsidization strategies could help the most. I think it's the entire field of economics has not yet had their deep learning or ChatGPT moment. They're still using very old models that are provably correct in one-step economies, which makes no sense because people adapt. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to see how AI can help kind of model out various conflicts and then obviously not make final decisions, but give policy advice too.
One very concrete use case I've seen, just to jump in there, is actually also for international aid organizations. The perception of these organizations in the places where they work is really important because it immediately affects also the safety of the teams that they deploy. And so a lot about news flow, deep fakes, and so on is quite relevant to understand, like, what's the situation right now? How can we know that the ICRC really did put those rice bags or whatever out there? What are people thinking? What are people saying, etc.? So I've also seen some of that, which is quite interesting. I've seen another question here. The lady in the front row.
Hello, this question is for Richard. You mentioned our AI is making us doing more intelligent things. Some will argue the technology has made us dumber. It's the whole social media thing. It's sort of debasing us, taking us down to the lowest common denominator. So I'm just curious, what's your view? How do you think about that? I know it's a bit of a philosophical question, but
that's a tough one. I do think ultimately we are all going to work and think at higher levels of abstraction. So what does that mean, right? We all use a toaster, but like most people could not build a toaster. If you drop people into the jungle, they could not build the infrastructure and the toast, like anything of a toaster, right? So AI will move us even higher in that level of abstraction. And if you educate folks well, we actually now there's studies both that say students get better and worse with AI. And it just depends really on how the context and so on. I'm actually really excited. One of our largest customers now is also a German university. We'll announce it later this quarter, where 34,000 students will get access to UPro and all Anthropic and OpenAI models and so on. And so I can guarantee you that the universities and high schools that are leaning into this and are thinking about how to use it well, how to allow basically that personal tutor-like environment to be used, but then also tell students, look, you're not going to get a grade based on an essay that you wrote at home anymore. You're going to have to be able to write essays in class when you have no internet access. you're going to have, and this is something that actually the US has sort of debate teams, right? You can win in debate. There are no debate teams in German high schools, at least not 10 years ago, but like having to think on your feet, and you can't just be like, oh, that's an interesting counterpoint to my argument. You know, let me counter that in 5 minutes after I read this whole thing on ChatGPT. Like, so you have to educate people on that front, and if that is done well, I think it'll be a huge improvement for that economy, for those people, to be able to use those tools now and think at higher levels of abstraction. I think maybe the second really important component is that people will have to get better at discerning and evaluating content and things that Gen AI created, and the original creation might become less and less important, right? So taste and discernment become more important skills to teach people.
Okay, interesting. There's one. So I have like 2 or 3 more questions. You had one question?
To Richard. So it's more like a competitive landscape question. Alan from Get It, we're building like agents in the commerce space. And I know that you're also backed by Salesforce Ventures, right? So I was impressed how Mark kind of pivoted the focus of Salesforce as like the agentic company now there. And now that you're also kind of positioning in enterprise space, I'd like to hear your perspective on how is that competitive landscape going to be evolving? How is the positioning working for you? Like to also learn then for us, because they are very good at selling, as you also know as an alum kind of from there. How do you see that evolving?
Yeah, I've worked with Mark on these agents for many years, and glad that it's really coming to fruition now. I do think it'll be a tough question for startups on how well can the incumbents kind of use this technology versus not. And so I think if you are in HR, for instance, and recruiting, it's going to be hard for massive recruiting companies that aren't tech companies to really use this. So in that sense, it's a great application for startups. If, however, your big incumbent is Amazon in e-commerce or sales, service, marketing, and CRM, those incumbents are fully activated and they understand the technology. They're tech companies too, and so it'll be harder for startups to compete on that. But what we've seen at the same time is like we've won pretty much every deal where we fought against a Copilot, for instance, because Microsoft just does not go as deep with their customers and really solve their search and LLM stack together. They have a strong bias for one type of LLM, so you're stuck with one vendor. And so we have actually been able to pull out existing Copilot applications as a small startup. And it's because we really focus on that accuracy bit. And then we're also okay, and in some cases have to run comparisons and benchmarks. And not just our own internal, but have external people validate that indeed we are more accurate. And in various cases, having to do our own with the customer benchmarking to show on these held out sets that no one knew, but you've evaluated yourself. And that unfortunately requires a lot of sophistication on the customer side, but it's a good thing for us usually when that happens.
The young gentleman with the scarf, and then there's one last question here in the
Hello.
front.
As a psychologist, I'm specialized on the expansion of consciousness, not only but also with psychedelics. And from this kind of work, I know that the integration is the most important part to make long-lasting change and to really utilize this like expanded states that somebody might have experienced. And if you see AI and like working with AI, using AI as an expanded state of consciousness, I feel integration is also really important there. And I'm wondering if you ever thought about that, and if yes, how you would address that in, for example, your trainings.
I let you think about this, but here I let you think about this, and I have one last question for you before we wrap up.
Yes, yes, it's important, and I guess you have to kind of define integration a little bit better to answer your question, because integration of psychedelics is very different to AI in the workplace. So I don't know if I can answer your question very well.
But good metaphysical thought experiment.
Maybe we'll go offline.
Yes.
After. Sorry.
So thank you very much. Great moderation, Nicole. How deep do you want to go into specialized and domain-specific agents? And adding to that question, you mentioned Pepsi versus Coca-Cola. Like, I mean, it would be great if I'm a baker and I have an agent that's trained by 100,000 bakeries and their specific data, right? But then why would they share this and give it to me? So what is your strategy there? Differentiating against foundation models, but also competing with consultants.
Yeah, there's sort of meta learning happening, right? That large companies can do, right? I understand the problems that Pepsi has, and so I understand and can speak the language of Coca-Cola also, right? So this meta learning happens in companies, and that's always beneficial. But yeah, you cannot and must not use one company's data for something else. That's just nature of the beast.
But there's so many functions within companies that are common across all companies or most companies, and those are areas that I think are ripe for domain-specific agents to come in and take on roles. That a lot of the work that happens is common across companies, and then again they can focus on what truly differentiates them in the
That's right.
marketplace.
Enabling functions then, but not the core.
Right, the core of who they are. Yeah, exactly.
You have to think.
It's interesting for the companies to buy your product, right? I mean,
Right. So you have to also look at every industry, actually. There are industries where it might make sense for 10 smaller players to pool their data to compete against the one big player, right? And then you have to also think about, like, bakeries don't really compete with one another because you're not going to go to Berlin just because they have the better bakery marketing or whatever, right? So there are actually industries too where people are fine and happy competing with one another or helping each other because they're not really directly competing on the same customer set.
Okay, so I know we could be going on for hours. I heard a lot about people and about behavior and about change. I heard a lot about speed, both for customers, but also for tech companies and adoption. And I guess a little bit of soul searching. What is enabling? What is core? How to deal with the impact of everything? Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great Davos.
Thanks everyone for your questions.
Thank you, everyone.